I learned early that being forgotten is different from being invisible. Invisible people go unnoticed. Forgotten people are seen, acknowledged, then immediately dismissed as unimportant. That was my role in the Petrov family, the daughter who existed in the space between awareness and oblivion. My sister Beatrice never had that problem. At 25, 3 years my junior, she commanded every room she entered with the effortless grace of someone born knowing the world would bend to accommodate her. Our parents, Christos and Maria, had built their modest antique restoration business through decades of careful work. But it was Beatrice they saw as their legacy. Beautiful, charming, connected to the right people through the right social circles. I was 28, working as their bookkeeper and inventory specialist, living in the apartment above the shop, existing in the margins of their dreams. The day Nikolai Koslov walked into our store, I was cataloging a shipment of Victorian music boxes in the back room. I heard my father's voice shift into the warm, eager tone he reserved for important clients, the kind who bought without haggling, who appreciated provenance over price. "Mr. Koslov, what an honor. Please, come in. Can I offer you tea? Coffee?" I glanced through the doorway and saw him. Tall, perhaps 6'3", with dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on ancient coins, all sharp angles and austere beauty. He wore a charcoal suit that whispered wealth in its perfect tailoring, and when he moved, it was with the controlled grace of someone who never doubted his right to any space he occupied. He was 35, I would learn later, at the peak of his power, with enterprises that existed in the gray spaces between legal commerce and something darker. "Just your time, Mr. Petrov," Nikolai replied, his accent carrying the faintest trace of his Russian heritage. "I'm interested in acquiring pieces from the Byzantine period, icons, reliquaries, manuscripts. My sources tell me you have access to such items." My hands stilled on the music box I'd been cataloging. Byzantine pieces were rare, expensive, and often entangled in complex provenance questions. The kind of inventory my father only discussed with his most trusted and wealthiest clients. "Perhaps," my father said carefully, "such pieces require discretion, authentication, the proper documentation." "Of course." Nikolai's voice held a note of amusement. "I appreciate a man who values propriety. I'd like to discuss this further, perhaps over dinner. I understand you have a family. I prefer to know the character of those I do business with." That was how it began, not with grand gestures or obvious seduction, but with a dinner invitation that included all of us. I dressed simply that evening, in a navy dress that was professional without drawing attention. Beatrice naturally wore crimson silk that clung to her perfect figure, her dark hair falling in artful waves, her makeup flawless. At the restaurant, an exclusive establishment where Nikolai was greeted by name, I watched him work the table like a master strategist. He asked my father about his career, my mother about her recipes, Beatrice about her social connections and charitable work. Then his gray eyes settled on me. "And you, Helena? Your father mentioned you manage the business side of operations." "I keep the books in order," I replied, surprised he'd asked. "Track inventory, handle authentication research, manage the less glamorous aspects. The foundation of any successful enterprise." His gaze held mine for a moment longer than necessary. Beauty attracts attention, but precision builds empires. It was the first time anyone outside my immediate work had acknowledged my contributions as valuable. The first time I felt seen rather than simply present. Over the following weeks, Nikolai became a regular presence at the shop. He would arrive to discuss pieces with my father, but increasingly, his questions turned to logistics, provenance verification, shipping regulations, the areas where my expertise lay. "Helena," he would say, "perhaps you could explain the authentication process for this manuscript. Your father mentioned you researched its origin." I would explain, professional and thorough, while Beatrice hovered nearby, laughing at remarks that weren't particularly funny, touching his arm when emphasizing a point. I noticed, but I told myself it meant nothing. Beatrice always drew attention. That was simply how the world worked. Then came the private conversations. "I value your insight," Nikolai said one afternoon, finding me alone in the archive room. "Your sister is charming, but you understand the substance behind the beauty. Would you be willing to advise me on some acquisitions? I'd compensate you for your time, of course." I should have questioned why a man of his obvious wealth and connections needed my modest expertise. Should have wondered why he sought me out in private. Should have protected myself. Instead, I said yes. Over the next 6 months, I became his consultant. He would text, asking about auction pieces, requesting research on provenance, inviting me to preview collections at galleries. Always professional, always appropriate, never crossing the invisible line into something more. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between business discussions, we would talk. About art, yes, but also about philosophy, about the weight of family expectations, about the peculiar loneliness of being surrounded by people who see only what they want to see. "You understand," he told me once, over coffee at a gallery opening, "what it is to be valued for your utility rather than yourself." "Yes," I admitted, because I did. My entire life had been an exercise in being useful without being essential. What I didn't realize was that he was mining those conversations, learning my vulnerabilities, mapping my desires, building a connection that felt real because I needed it to be real. My parents approved of his growing presence. "Such a cultured man," my mother would say. "And so interested in our Beatrice." Because of course it was Beatrice he was interested in. Beautiful, connected, charming Beatrice, who could open doors to high society, to social circles where discretion about one's business affairs was valued, where wealthy collectors moved in orbits my family could only glimpse from the edges. I saw them talking at family dinners, watched him laugh at her stories, noticed how he ensured she was included in every conversation. But he still sought me out for the quiet moments, still asked my opinion, still made me feel, for brief intervals, like I mattered. I was foolish enough to hope it meant something. My 29th birthday fell on a Saturday in October. My parents, typically focused on the shop, had surprised me by insisting on a family dinner at home. Nothing elaborate. My mother's cooking, simple decorations, the 4 of us around the table. "Invite Nikolai," my mother suggested. "He's become such a good friend to our family." I hesitated. I'm not sure he'd want to attend such a small gathering. "Nonsense. I'll invite him myself." He accepted, arriving with a gift, a first edition of a book on Byzantine art I'd mentioned wanting months ago, the kind of thoughtful gesture that made my heart betray my better judgment. Dinner was pleasant. My father told stories about the shop's early days. Beatrice entertained us with tales from her charity committee. Nikolai was charming, attentive, perfect. After dessert, my mother suggested Beatrice show Nikolai the garden. She'd been working on the landscaping. I offered to clear the table, comfortable in my familiar role of quiet support. I was rinsing plates when I heard laughter from the garden. Something made me look out the kitchen window. They were standing beneath the trellis my father had built years ago, strings of warm lights casting a golden glow. Beatrice's hand was on Nikolai's chest. His hand cradled her face. And then they were kissing. Not a polite peck, not an accidental brush of lips. A kiss that spoke of familiarity, of history, of something that had been building while I cataloged inventory and researched provenance and convinced myself that professional respect meant something more. I stood at the sink, water running over plates I'd forgotten I was holding, watching the man I'd allowed myself to care for kiss my sister on my birthday. The plate slipped from my hands, shattering in the sink. The sound brought my mother to the kitchen. "Helena, what happened? Are you all right?" "Fine," I heard myself say. Just clumsy. I cleaned up the broken ceramic with mechanical precision. When Nikolai and Beatrice returned from the garden, faces flushed and eyes bright, I smiled and thanked everyone for the lovely evening and excused myself, claiming an early morning at the shop. No tears, no accusations, no dramatic confrontation. I simply walked upstairs to my apartment, closed the door, and allowed myself to understand what I'd been to him. A bridge. A means to access my sister, to gain my family's trust, to establish himself in our lives. Every conversation we'd shared, every moment of connection I'd treasured, tools in a strategy that had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with what I could provide him access to. I had been used, efficiently, thoroughly, almost kindly. The realization didn't break me. I'd been overlooked too many times to shatter over being forgotten again. But something shifted inside me that night, a quiet decision made in the dark of my small apartment. I would no longer make myself available to be useful to people who found me insufficient. I would no longer be the bridge that others walked across to reach more interesting destinations. Starting tomorrow, I would begin the careful, deliberate process of building a life that didn't require me to be anyone's forgotten daughter, anyone's useful consultant, anyone's means to an end. I didn't know then that the man in my garden had already made his own decision, that what he'd planned and what he'd discovered were two entirely different things, that walking away from someone who's used you is easy, staying away when they refuse to let you go is something else entirely. I didn't know that being forgotten by Nikolai Koslov would prove far less dangerous than being remembered by him. The Monday after my birthday, I began the careful dismantling of my availability. I stopped answering Nikolai's texts immediately. When he called about an auction piece, I responded 12 hours later with brief, professional information, ending with, "My schedule is quite full. Perhaps consult another expert." When he appeared at the shop, I ensured I was occupied with tasks that kept me in back rooms, away from casual conversations. My parents noticed, of course. "Helena, Mr. Kozlov was asking for you," my father said one afternoon. "He values your expertise. Don't be rude." "I provided the information he requested," I replied, not looking up from the ledger. "Everything else is personal time I've chosen to allocate elsewhere." My mother's eyes narrowed. "This isn't about Beatrice, is it? About her and Nikolai?" The careful phrasing, her and Nikolai, as if it were established fact, public knowledge, something I should simply accept. "I'm happy for them," I said, and meant it. Beatrice would get everything she wanted: wealth, status, a handsome husband. Nikolai would get access to her social connections, legitimacy for his business operations, a beautiful wife to display. Everyone would get exactly what they'd planned for. Except me. I got the clarity of no longer being useful. I began job hunting quietly. My credentials were solid: degree in art history, years of authentication experience, a proven track record with provenance research. Within 3 weeks, I had an interview at a mid-sized auction house across the city. The position was modest, junior specialist in their manuscripts department. The pay was less than I made helping my family, but it came with benefits, independence, and distance. I accepted the offer the same day they extended it. "You're leaving?" My father's voice carried genuine shock when I gave notice. "But the business, you're essential to operations." Essential. The word I'd craved for 28 years, offered only when my departure created inconvenience. "You'll manage," I said gently. "Beatrice can learn the systems, or you can hire someone." "This is about Nikolai, isn't it?" My mother's accusation hung in the air. "You're jealous of your sister." "I'm tired," I replied, which was true enough. Tired of living above the shop, of having no separation between work and family. This is a good opportunity. What I didn't say: I'm tired of being the person who exists Only when you need something I can provide. I gave them 6 weeks' notice, enough time to train a replacement or adjust their systems. I found a small studio apartment on the other side of the city. 1 bedroom, 4th floor walk-up. Windows that faced east and filled the space with morning light. It was mine. That was all that mattered. Nikolai tried to reach me directly twice during those 6 weeks. The first time, he appeared at the shop with the pretense of discussing a collection. "Helena," he said, managing to corner me in the archive room. "You've been avoiding my calls." "I've been busy." I continued cataloging without looking up. The transition period requires focus. "I heard you're leaving. Your father mentioned it." "Yes. May I ask why?" I finally looked at him. Those gray eyes that had once made me feel seen now revealed themselves as precisely what they'd always been: calculating, strategic, searching for angles. "I received a better opportunity," I said. "It's time I built my own career." Something flickered in his expression. "If this is about what you saw—" "This has nothing to do with you," I interrupted quietly. "Or my sister. This is about my own professional development. I'm sure you understand. You're a businessman. You recognize when it's time to pursue new ventures." The dismissal in my tone was intentional. I was giving him an easy exit, a way to accept my withdrawal without awkwardness. He didn't take it. "Have dinner with me," he said. "Let me explain." There's nothing to explain. I returned to my work. You and Beatrice are happy. My family approves. Everyone is getting what they want. There's no problem here. "Helena, I have a great deal of work to complete before my departure, if you'll excuse me." It was the first time in 6 months I'd cut him off, dismissed him, made clear that my time was no longer available for his convenience. He left, but the look in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or something more complex, suggested this wasn't the conclusion he'd expected. The second attempt came during my final week. A delivery arrived at the shop, a portfolio case containing documentation for a Byzantine manuscript he was purchasing at auction. A note in his angular handwriting: "I would value your authentication before finalizing this acquisition. Dinner to discuss? Choose the time and place." I documented the manuscript professionally, provided detailed authentication, and returned it with my invoice for consulting services and a typed note. Authentication complete. Piece is genuine. 11th century. Constantinople origin. Best wishes with your acquisition. No dinner, no personal conversation. Just the work. Completed efficiently, then closed. The invoice I charged exactly what I would have charged any client. Dimitrios, Nikolai's assistant, picked up the portfolio. He handed me a check for triple my invoiced amount. "Mr. Koslov wanted to ensure you were properly compensated for your expertise," Dimitrios said carefully. "He also asked me to tell you that your insight is irreplaceable." I handed the check back. "The invoiced amount is appropriate compensation. Please ask Mr. Koslov not to contact me for future consultations. I'm no longer available for outside work." Dimitrios looked genuinely confused. In his world, people didn't refuse Nikolai Koslov's money, didn't turn down his requests. "Miss Petrov," he began. "I've accepted a position that precludes outside consulting," I said firmly. "It's nothing personal, simply professional boundaries." That evening, Nikolai called my cell phone directly. I answered because ignoring him seemed more dramatic than a simple conversation. "Hello? Helena." His voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. Frustration, maybe. "Why did you refuse my payment?" "Because you overpaid by 200%. The invoice reflects the work completed. The payment reflects the value I place on your expertise. Then you need to recalibrate your valuation metrics." I kept my tone professional, distant. The work was standard authentication. Nothing more. Have I done something to offend you? The question was so absurd I almost laughed. Offend implied emotion, investment, caring enough to be hurt. Not at all, I said truthfully. You've been a valuable client to my family's business. I appreciate the opportunities you've provided. I simply need to focus on my new position now. What if I need your expertise? There are many qualified specialists in the city. I'm happy to recommend several. I don't want other specialists. I want you. The possessiveness in his tone startled me, as if he had some claim on my time, my skills, my availability. That's no longer possible. I said gently, I wish you and Beatrice every happiness. Please give her my regards. I ended the call before he could respond. It was petty, perhaps, but I needed him to understand. I was no longer a resource he could access, no longer a bridge he could walk across. I was simply gone. My last day at the family shop, my parents threw a small farewell lunch. Beatrice attended, radiant in a designer dress I recognized from the spring collections, a gift from Nikolai, no doubt. I'll miss having you here, she said, kissing my cheek, though I understand why you're going. It must be difficult, working so closely with family. She meant it kindly. Beatrice had never been intentionally cruel. She simply operated in a universe where her happiness was the natural order of things, where men fell in love with her and sisters supported from the margins. I'm excited about the new opportunity, I said. And I was. That evening I moved the last box into my new apartment. Studio, 425 square feet, radiator heat and a window that rattled in strong winds. My furniture was secondhand, my dishes mismatched, my decorative budget non-existent, but when I closed the door and stood in the center of my small space, I felt something I hadn't experienced in the Petrov household. Possibility. This was mine. Chosen. Built by my own hands. For my own purposes. For the first time in 28 years, I didn't exist in relation to anyone else's needs or expectations. I unpacked, arranged my modest belongings, and slept that night in my own bed, in my own apartment, owing nothing to anyone. I didn't know that across the city, Nikolai Kozlov was discovering that the quiet woman he'd used as a means to an end had become an obsession he couldn't name. Didn't know that my absence had created a void in his carefully constructed life that Beatrice's beauty and charm couldn't fill. Didn't know that walking away from him had been the beginning, not the end, of our story. All I knew was that I'd survived being forgotten. The question I couldn't answer yet. Could I survive being remembered? The auction house provided structure, purpose, and merciful distance from my old life. I cataloged manuscripts, researched provenance, consulted on medieval texts. My colleagues were pleasant, professional, uninterested in my family drama. Perfect. 6 weeks into my new position, I was invited to a gallery opening, a professional networking event where auction house staff mingled with dealers and collectors. I wore simple black, minimal jewelry, the uniform of someone who understood that in the art world, the work should draw attention, not the specialist. I was examining a 15th century prayer book when I felt it, the particular weight of being watched. I turned. Nikolai Kozlov stood 15 feet away, conversation with a gallery owner apparently forgotten, as his gray eyes fixed on me. He looked different. Thinner, perhaps, or simply more sharply defined. His suit was impeccable as always, but there was something in his posture, a tension I'd never noticed before. Our eyes met. He nodded slightly. I returned the gesture with professional courtesy and deliberately turned back to the prayer book. From the corner of my eye, I watched him approach. Smooth, inevitable, like weather. Helena. His voice was quiet, meant only for me. I didn't expect to see you here. Professional obligations. I kept my attention on the manuscript. Auction house staff are expected to maintain industry connections. Of course. He moved to stand beside me, studying the prayer book with what appeared to be genuine interest. 14th century, if I'm not mistaken. 15th, Flemish, based on the illumination style. Ah, I defer to your expertise. The old formula, the one we'd used for 6 months when he was cultivating my assistance. I recognized the pattern and refused to follow it. If you'll excuse me, I said, preparing to move to the next display. Helena, wait. His hand moved as if to touch my arm, then stopped. Please. 5 minutes of conversation, that's all I'm asking. About what? I met his gaze directly. We have no business to discuss. I'm no longer consulting privately. Not about business. Something in his expression shifted. Vulnerability, perhaps, though I didn't trust my ability to read him anymore. About how you've been, what you've been doing. I'm well. Working. That's all there is to report. You left very suddenly. I gave 6 weeks' notice. That's standard professional practice. You know what I mean. His voice dropped lower. You disappeared, stopped answering calls, refused dinner invitations, returned my payments. I established appropriate professional boundaries, I interrupted. Something I should have done from the beginning. Is this about Beatrice? The directness surprised me. I'd expected him to avoid the subject entirely. This is about my career, I said evenly. My independence. My choice to build a life that doesn't revolve around being useful to other people. You were never just useful to me. The presumption in the statement, that he could define what I'd been to him, what our interactions had meant, sparked something sharp in my chest. Then what was I? I asked quietly. Because from where I stood, I was a resource. Someone with knowledge you needed, access you wanted, a connection to a family and a woman who could provide social legitimacy for your business operations. His jaw tightened. That's not... It's fine, I continued. Truly. I understand how strategy works. You identified objectives, allocated resources efficiently, achieved your goals. I don't fault you for it. Helena. What I fault myself for, I said, the words emerging with unexpected honesty, is believing that professional respect might mean something more. That's my failure, not yours. I've corrected it. I turned to leave. His next words stopped me. I ended things with Beatrice. I turned back slowly. What? 2 weeks ago, I ended the relationship. The gallery noise faded to background static. Why? Because it was wrong. He ran a hand through his hair, disrupting its perfect styling. Because I couldn't... He stopped, recalibrated. It wasn't fair to her. To continue something when I couldn't give her what she deserved. That's your business, I said carefully. And hers. It has nothing to do with me. Doesn't it? The question hung between us. I could feel the trap closing. Whatever I answered would give him something, some opening to wedge himself back into my life. No, I said firmly. It doesn't. What you and Beatrice do or don't do is between you. I've moved on. I suggest you do the same. I walked away before he could respond, threading through the crowd toward the exit. My hands were shaking. I needed air, space, distance from those gray eyes that saw too much. Outside, the November wind cut through my jacket. I walked quickly, heels clicking on pavement, putting blocks between myself and the gallery. I made it 4 blocks before I heard footsteps behind me. Helena, please. I stopped, turned. Nikolai had followed, his expensive coat unbuttoned, hair disheveled by wind. What do you want? I asked, truly, because I don't understand what we're doing here. I want... He stopped 3 feet away, maintaining distance as if afraid I'd flee again. I want to explain. There's nothing to explain. There's everything to explain. He stepped closer. When I met your family, yes, I had objectives, business objectives. I needed connections, legitimacy, access to certain social circles. I know, I said. I'm not stupid, Nikolai. I figured out what I was to you. What you were? He laughed, the sound bitter. Helena, you were the only real thing in 6 months of strategic maneuvering. Every conversation we had, every moment you explained something with that precision you have, every time you smiled at something I said, that was real. The only real thing in my entire carefully constructed life. Don't, I whispered. Don't rewrite history because it's convenient. I'm not. I'm telling you what I couldn't see then, what I was too focused on strategy to recognize. He moved closer still. You asked me once what it felt like to be valued for utility rather than yourself. Do you remember? I nodded, not trusting my voice. I understood because that's all I've ever been. The enforcer, the strategist, the man who solves problems. People fear me or use me or negotiate with me. No one just... He stopped, searching for words. You talked to me about art, about philosophy, about things that had nothing to do with what I could provide. You saw me as a person, not a weapon or a wallet. And yet you chose Beatrice. I chose wrong. The admission was simple, devastating. I chose what I thought I wanted instead of what I needed. Social connections, legitimacy, the perfect wife who would enhance my position. Stop. I held up a hand. I don't need to hear this. You and Beatrice ended things. Fine. That doesn't mean... It means everything, he interrupted. Because every dinner with her, every public appearance, every moment I was supposed to be cementing my strategy, all I could think about was you. How you would have explained something differently. What comment you would have made. The quiet way you laughed at observations that were actually funny, not socially necessary. Nikolai, I used you, he said bluntly. You're right about that. I identified you as a useful connection, cultivated your expertise, built a relationship with intentions that had nothing to do with you as a person. And then, somewhere in those 6 months, you became the only person whose opinion I actually valued, whose presence I looked forward to, whose absence made everything else feel hollow. That's not my problem to solve, I said, even as my heart traitorously wanted to believe him. I know. I'm not asking you to solve anything. He took a breath. I'm asking for a chance to prove that what I discovered about myself, about us, is real. Not strategy, not utility. Real. You had 6 months, I said quietly. 6 months where you could have chosen differently, where you could have seen me instead of using me. You're right. And I will regret that for the rest of my life. His voice was rough. But you walked away without a word, without confrontation or tears or drama. You just left. Like I hadn't mattered at all. Because you didn't, I said. Not enough. And that's when I realized you were the only person who'd ever had the strength to do that. The only person who valued themselves enough not to beg me to stay. He smiled slightly, painfully. Everyone else in my life fears me or needs me or wants something from me. You're the only one who was willing to walk away when I failed you. Is that what this is? Obsession with the one who got away? No. He shook his head. This is understanding, too late, that the woman I dismissed as a means to an end was the only end worth pursuing. The words hung in the cold November air. I wanted to believe them. God, how I wanted to believe them. But I'd learned the cost of believing beautiful words from beautiful men. I can't, I whispered. I can't be someone's realization after they've chosen someone else. I can't be the consolation prize or the lesson learned. You're not... I need to go. I stepped back. Please don't follow me this time. I turned and walked away, and this time he let me go. But as I reached the corner, I looked back. He stood where I'd left him, watching me with an expression I couldn't read from this distance. I didn't know then that Nikolai Kozlov had never failed at anything he truly committed to. Didn't know that his patience was legendary in his world, that he understood strategy over years, not weeks. Didn't know that letting me walk away was the first move in the longest campaign of his life. All I knew was that my heart hurt and my hands shook, and believing him felt more dangerous than anything I'd survived so far. So I went home to my small apartment and told myself I'd done the right thing, even as part of me wondered what I'd just refused. 2 months passed. Winter settled over the city with the particular grayness that made every day feel like twilight. I worked, came home, existed in the small rhythms of independence I'd fought to create. I didn't hear from Nikolai directly. No calls, no texts, no appearances at my workplace. But I felt his presence. It started small. The coffee shop on my route to work suddenly knew my order. Medium vanilla latte, no foam, without me speaking it. When I tried to pay, the barista smiled and said, "Already taken care of, miss." My building's temperamental radiator, which had clanked and hissed all winter, was suddenly repaired. The superintendent, when I asked, shrugged. Anonymous benefactor paid for upgrades throughout the building. Happens sometimes. The manuscript I'd been researching for work, which required access to a private collection in Boston, became suddenly available when the collector, who'd refused the auction house's previous requests, personally called my supervisor to grant access. Never obvious, never intrusive, just the quiet removal of small obstacles, the smoothing of rough edges in my daily life. I should have been angry, should have called him and demanded he stop interfering. Instead, I felt something more complicated, because these weren't grand gestures designed to impress. These were the actions of someone who'd been paying attention to details I'd never mentioned, problems I'd never complained about. The broken streetlight outside my building that made me nervous walking home at night. Fixed. The library book I'd wanted to read but couldn't afford to buy. Left at my office with a note. Found an extra copy. Thought you might enjoy. A colleague. My favorite bakery, which had been struggling and threatening to close. Suddenly thriving with a line around the block and a discreet new investor who demanded neither publicity nor influence over operations. He was weaving himself into my life through care, not control. Through listening, not demanding. It was more devastating than any diamond could have been. 3 months after the gallery opening, I found a package at my office. Inside, a manuscript fragment, 12th century, Byzantine origin. My specialty, a note in Nikolai's handwriting. I acquired this at auction yesterday. The provenance documentation is incomplete. I would value your professional authentication. Name your consulting fee. I researched the piece. Genuine, fascinating, with a complex ownership history that took 2 weeks to untangle. I prepared a detailed report, sent it with an invoice. He paid exactly the invoiced amount. Nothing more. A week later, another piece arrived, then another, each requiring research, each with incomplete provenance that needed my specific expertise. He was creating legitimate professional reasons for contact. Not personal, not manipulative. Just work that genuinely required my skills, compensated fairly. After the 5th piece, I called him. "You're purchasing artifacts specifically to employ me," I said without preamble. "I'm purchasing artifacts that require expert authentication," he replied smoothly. "That you're the most qualified specialist for this work is fortunate." "Nikolai, have I been inappropriate, Helena? Have I contacted you about anything other than professional services you provide? Have I shown up at your home or workplace uninvited?" "No," I admitted. then I'm simply a client who values quality work and is willing to pay for it. I couldn't argue with that. Not really. Why? I asked instead. What do you want from me? Right now? Professional authentication of Byzantine manuscripts. A pause. Eventually, a conversation that isn't about business. But I'm patient. I can wait until you're ready. And if I'm never ready, then I'll have an excellent collection of properly authenticated artifacts, he said. And you'll have built a strong consulting portfolio. We both benefit. I laughed despite myself. That's very logical. I've learned that logic works better with you than grand gestures. You've been making plenty of gestures, I said. The radiator, the streetlight, my favorite bakery. I don't know what you're talking about. His voice carried amusement. Though I'm pleased you have heat and safe streets and access to quality pastries. Nikolai, have dinner with me, he said. Professional dinner. We can discuss the next manuscript I'm considering. Purely business. That's what you said last time. Last time I was using you, he said bluntly. This time I'm asking you. There's a difference. What difference? Last time I already knew what I wanted and was maneuvering you to help me get it. This time, I'm asking what you want and seeing if there's any possibility I could be part of it. The honesty disarmed me. Always his greatest weapon, I was learning. Not charm or wealth, but the unexpected vulnerability of truth. One dinner, I heard myself say. Professional. I'll pick you up Friday at 7. I'll meet you there, I corrected. Tell me where. He named a small restaurant in the historic district. Quiet, intimate, not flashy. A place chosen for conversation, not impression. I hung up, wondering what I'd just agreed to. Friday arrived with the particular anxiety of a first date, which this absolutely wasn't. Professional dinner, business discussion, nothing more. I dressed carefully, charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, professional armor. The restaurant was exactly as I'd imagined. Small, elegant, tables spaced for privacy. Nikolai was already seated when I arrived, rising as the hostess led me over. Helena, he pulled out my chair. Thank you for coming. You're paying me, I pointed out, settling into the seat. It's a business meeting. Of course. Something in his eyes suggested amusement. Shall we discuss the 13th century gospel I'm considering? We did. For exactly 40 minutes, we discussed provenance, authentication markers, market value, acquisition strategy. Professional, thorough, the kind of consultation I'd provided dozens of times. Then the dinner plates were cleared, and coffee arrived, and Nikolai set down his cup and looked at me directly. I need to tell you about Beatrice, he said. That's not necessary. It is, because you deserve to understand what happened, what I did and why. I waited, wary but curious. When I met your family, I was looking for specific connections. Your sister had access to social circles I needed, charity boards, cultural committees, the kind of legitimate society that would provide cover and credibility for my business operations. I know this, I said quietly. What you don't know is how quickly that strategy fell apart. He ran a finger along the rim of his coffee cup. Beatrice is charming, beautiful, everything I thought I needed in a partner, but she saw me as a prize, not a person. Valued my wealth and power, not anything beneath it. That's not. It's true, he interrupted gently. And I don't fault her for it. That's the currency of her world. The problem was that spending time with her made me realize what I'd had with you. Real conversation, genuine interest. Someone who argued with me about Byzantine art history at midnight because you cared about accuracy, not because you wanted to impress me. You used those conversations, I said. Mined them for information about me. Yes. No denial. and in the process, became someone different than the man who started those conversations. You changed me, Helena. Made me want to be someone worthy of the respect you showed me. Pretty words, I said, even as my heart betrayed me by believing them. True words. He leaned forward. I ended things with Beatrice because continuing them was dishonest. To her, yes, but mostly to myself. I couldn't stop thinking about you. Couldn't stop wondering what you were doing, whether you were happy, whether you thought about me at all. I tried not to, I admitted. Did it work? No. Something shifted in his expression. Hope, maybe. These months of distance, of professional boundaries. You needed them. I understand that. But I need you to understand something too. What? I'm not going anywhere. His voice was quiet, certain. I will wait as long as it takes for you to trust me. I will earn back what I destroyed through patience and consistency, and proving through actions that you matter. Not for what you can give me, but for who you are. And if I can't trust you again, then I'll have spent my time pursuing something worthwhile, even if I never achieve it. He smiled slightly. That's more than most people get. I looked at this man, dangerous, powerful, feared by those who knew what he really was, and saw something I'd never expected. Genuine uncertainty. He didn't know if I'd give him another chance. Couldn't strategize or manipulate his way to the outcome he wanted. For the first time in his carefully controlled life, Nikolai Kozlov had to simply wait and hope. I'm not ready, I said finally, for anything beyond professional work. I know. I need time, space, proof that this isn't just obsession with what you couldn't have. I understand. And I need you to stop fixing things in my life without asking. The radiator, the streetlight, it's thoughtful, but it's also controlling. He considered this. Fair. I'll limit myself to professional interactions and occasionally ensuring you have good coffee. Despite myself, I smiled. The coffee can stay. Progress, he said softly. We finished dinner discussing the manuscript authentically, professionally. He walked me to my car, parked 2 blocks away, and didn't try to touch me, kiss me, push for more. Thank you for dinner, I said, unlocking the door. Thank you for giving me a chance to prove I've learned from my mistakes. As I drove home, I realized something. For 6 months, Nikolai had used me efficiently, strategically, without seeing who I actually was. Now he was seeing me. Really seeing me. And instead of running when I wouldn't make it easy, he was staying, waiting, proving through patient, consistent action that he meant what he said. It was, I admitted in the safety of my small apartment, more devastating than any grand gesture could have been. Because grand gestures were easy, patience was hard. And Nikolai Kozlov, I was learning, never did anything the easy way. 6 months of careful, professional distance taught me more about Nikolai than 6 months of strategic courtship ever had. He was patient in ways that belied his reputation for swift, decisive action. Methodical in demonstrating change rather than promising it. He continued sending pieces for authentication, always legitimate work, always fairly compensated. Sometimes we'd meet to discuss findings over coffee, professional conversations that occasionally drifted into philosophy, art history, observations about the world. He never pushed for more, never referenced the past or demanded declarations about the future. It was, I realized, exactly what I needed. Space to heal, to rebuild trust, to understand whether what I felt was genuine or simply the remnants of old hurt. My parents asked about him occasionally. We don't see Mr. Kozlov anymore, my mother mentioned during one family dinner. Is he no longer collecting? He is, I replied. I consult for him professionally now. What happened with Beatrice? My father asked. I looked at my sister, who was pushing food around her plate with unusual listlessness. Since Nikolai had ended things, she'd withdrawn somewhat. Not devastated, but definitely chastened. They weren't compatible, I said simply. These things happen. What I didn't mention, the rumors I'd heard from industry contacts, that Nikolai had quietly divested from several questionable business ventures, that his operations had shifted toward complete legitimacy, despite the financial hit that restructuring entailed, that the man feared for his ruthlessness was methodically dismantling the aspects of his empire built on fear and shadow. It was 7 months after our first professional dinner that everything changed. I was working late at the auction house, preparing authentication for an upcoming estate sale, when my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Miss Petrov? An unfamiliar voice. Male, with an accent I couldn't place. I have information you need to hear. About Nikolai Kozlov. My stomach dropped. Who is this? Someone who knows what kind of man you've been associating with. Someone who wants to protect you. I'm hanging up. He's using you again, the voice interrupted. Using your authentication work to build legitimacy for pieces acquired through theft. You're providing cover for stolen artifacts, Miss Petrov, making you complicit in international trafficking. That's not... But doubt crept in. Was it possible? Had I been too trusting? Check the provenance of the gospel fragment he had you authenticate last month. Track its ownership history before 1990. You'll find gaps, questions. Then ask yourself why he needed your professional reputation attached to it. The line went dead. I sat frozen, the phone cold against my ear. It couldn't be true. Nikolai had been transparent about his business dealings, at least the ones involving me. Hadn't he? I pulled up my files on the gospel fragment, began tracing ownership history with more scrutiny than I'd applied during the initial authentication. There were gaps, small ones, but present. Periods where ownership was unclear, documentation thin. Not necessarily unusual for pieces that old, but also not above suspicion. I worked through the night, cross-referencing databases, checking against known stolen art registries, examining every detail with fresh, suspicious eyes. By dawn, I had to admit the truth. I couldn't definitively prove the piece was stolen, but I also couldn't prove it wasn't. The documentation was just ambiguous enough to be concerning. I called Nikolai at 7 a.m. Helena? His voice carried immediate concern. What's wrong? The gospel fragment. I need complete provenance documentation. Everything you have, not just what was provided at auction. A pause. Why? Because someone called me last night claiming you're using my authentication to legitimize stolen artifacts. I see. His voice had gone cold, professional. Someone is trying to turn you against me. Then prove them wrong. Show me the documentation. I'll bring it to your office this morning. He arrived an hour later, portfolio in hand. We spread documentation across my desk. Auction records, export certificates, chain of custody papers. It was thorough. Almost too thorough. These export certificates, I said, pointing to a stamp. This office closed in 1989. These are dated 1992. Nikolai examined them, his expression unreadable. Then someone forged them after the fact. I purchased in good faith from a reputable dealer. Or you knew they were questionable and needed my authentication to establish legitimacy. You really believe I'd risk your professional reputation? He looked at me directly. Risk losing you again over artifacts? I don't know what to believe, I admitted. 7 months ago, you admitted to using me strategically. How do I know you're not doing it again? Because I opened my entire acquisition history to your scrutiny. He pulled out his phone, made a call. Dimitrios, send Miss Petrov access to our complete collection database. Everything. Authentication documents, purchase records, correspondence. Everything. He hung up, met my eyes. Someone is trying to destroy what we've been building. Someone who benefits from you doubting me. Who? I have suspicions. Let me handle it. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give without putting you at risk. He stood. Review everything. If you find genuine evidence of wrongdoing, report it. I won't stop you. But don't let anonymous accusations destroy 7 months of honesty. After he left, I spent days reviewing his collection records. Everything checked out. Some pieces had complex histories, but nothing definitively stolen. Nothing that my authentication had been used to improperly legitimize. Either he was innocent, or he was very good at covering his tracks. I was still reviewing files when my phone rang again. Unknown number. You're not listening, the same voice said. So perhaps you need a more direct demonstration of what Nikolai Kozlov really is. Who are you? Someone who knows his world better than you do. Meet me. I'll show you evidence you can't dispute. Where? He named a location. A warehouse in the industrial district. Come alone, tonight at 9, if you want the truth about the man you're protecting. Every instinct screamed trap. But if there was a chance Nikolai was using me again, I needed to know. I texted the address to a colleague with instructions to call police if I didn't check in by 10. Then I went. The warehouse was dark, exactly as ominous as expected. I was about to turn back when lights flickered on inside. I pushed open the door. Miss Petrov, thank you for coming. A man emerged from the shadows. Late 40s, expensive suit, cold eyes. Behind him, 3 other men. Large, armed. You have evidence? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh, I have something better. He smiled. I have leverage. Understanding came too late. This wasn't about Nikolai's legitimacy. This was about using me against him. Who are you? Alexandros Dimitriou, business associate of your friend Kozlov. Or rather, former associate. He's been making changes to operations that affect my interests. I need him to reconsider. This has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with you. Alexandros nodded to his men. Nikolai Kozlov doesn't care about much, but he cares about you. Obsessively, from what I understand. You're the weakness I've been looking for. Before I could run, hands grabbed me. A cloth pressed over my mouth and nose. Chemical smell, world going dark. My last thought before unconsciousness. I'd walked into exactly the trap Nikolai had been trying to protect me from. I woke in darkness, head pounding, wrists bound. Concrete floor beneath me, the smell of mildew and rust. The warehouse, presumably, though I'd been moved to a different area. Footsteps approached. Light flicked on, harsh, blinding. Awake, good. Alexandros stood over me. We have work to do. He won't negotiate for me, I said, hoping it was true. We're just business associates. Don't insult my intelligence. I've had you both under surveillance for months. I know he authenticates pieces just to have excuses to see you. I know he's restructured his entire operation, walking away from profitable ventures because they don't meet your ethical standards. He crouched to my level. Nikolai Kozlov has never cared about anyone's ethical standards in his life. Until you. My phone buzzed in his hand. He'd taken it, obviously. He answered on speaker. Alexandros. Nikolai's voice was deadly calm. Let her go. No demands? No threats? Let her go, and we'll discuss whatever terms you want. Better, but not good enough. Alexandros smiled. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to transfer operational control of 3 Eastern European territories to me. You're going to withdraw from legitimate art market operations, leaving that space clear for my interests. And you're going to do it in the next 6 hours, or Miss Petrov will suffer consequences. I need to know she's alive, unharmed. Alexandros held the phone near me. Helena, I swallowed. I'm sorry. I should have listened. Are you hurt? No, not yet. Brave woman. Alexandros pulled the phone back. You have 6 hours, Kozlov. Don't make me demonstrate what happens when you disappoint me. After he left, I worked at my bindings. Rope, tight but not impossibly so. I was twisting my wrists when a new sound came. Gunfire, distant, but approaching. The door exploded inward. Nikolai entered like vengeance incarnate, gun in hand, Dimitrios and 5 other men behind him. His gray eyes swept the room, found me, and something in his expression shifted from cold fury to visible relief. He crossed to me in 3 strides, cutting my bindings with a knife that appeared from nowhere. Are you hurt? His hands ran over my arms, checking for injury with surprising gentleness. No, scared, but not hurt. Good. He helped me stand, then handed me off to Dimitrios. Get her out. Now. Wait. I grabbed his arm. Alexandros is currently discovering why people fear disappointing me. His voice carried absolute finality. You don't need to see what happens next. Nikolai. Helena. He cupped my face, thumb brushing my cheek. Trust me, just this once. Let me protect you. Dimitrios led me out through a maze of corridors. Behind us I heard voices, a single gunshot, then silence. I didn't ask what happened, didn't want to know. Outside, dawn was breaking. Dimitrios put me in a car, drove me to a building I didn't recognize. Luxury tower, penthouse level. Mr. Kozlov's private residence, he explained. Safest place in the city. He'll join you once he's finished. The penthouse was stunning. Minimalist, expensive, every detail chosen with care, but also surprisingly personal. Books on art and philosophy. A desk covered in acquisition documents. Photos, recent ones, of gallery openings we'd both attended, carefully cropped, so we appeared to be together even when we'd been across the room from each other. I was examining those photos when Nikolai arrived 3 hours later. He looked exhausted. His suit jacket was gone, shirt sleeves rolled up, a cut above his eyebrow. It's finished, he said simply. Alexandros won't threaten you again. Won't threaten anyone. Did you? Don't ask questions you don't want answered. He crossed to the bar, poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey. I did what was necessary to protect you. Because you love me? The question emerged without permission. He turned, glass halfway to his lips. Because I would burn my entire empire before allowing anyone to harm you. Does that answer your question? That's not love. That's obsession. It's both. He set down the glass untasted. I'm obsessed with you, Helena. With your precision, your integrity, the way you see beauty in medieval manuscripts and refuse to compromise your ethics for convenience. I'm obsessed with how you walked away from me without begging me to stay. Because you valued yourself enough to know you deserved better. He moved closer. And I love you. Desperately. In ways I didn't think I was capable of. I restructured my entire business because making you proud mattered more than profit. I gave Alexandros exactly what he wanted. Territories, operations, wealth, as ransom for your safety before I ever stormed that warehouse. You gave up your empire? I gave up parts I shouldn't have built in the first place. Parts that would have made you ashamed of me. His voice roughened. You asked me once what I wanted. The answer is simple. I want to be someone worthy of you. Even if you never choose me, I want to be the man you believed I could be. I stared at him, this dangerous man who'd dismantled his own power structure for the possibility of my respect. I don't know if I can trust you, I admitted. I know. I've given you every reason not to. He didn't move closer, didn't push, but I'll spend the rest of my life proving I've changed. proving that you weren't wrong to see potential in the man buried under all the strategy. The rest of your life is a long time. I'm patient. You've taught me that. I thought about the past year, his consistency, his respect for boundaries, his willingness to wait without demanding. I'm not ready for grand gestures, I said finally, or dramatic declarations. Good. Neither am I. I stopped, trying to articulate what I needed. I need ordinary. I need coffee dates and conversations about manuscripts and someone who sees me when I'm not useful. I can do ordinary. He smiled slightly. I'm spectacularly terrible at it, but I can learn. And I need honesty. Complete honesty. About your business. About your past. About what you're walking away from. Done. And I need time. Lots of it. To rebuild trust. I have nothing but time. He held out his hand. Will you let me try? No guarantees, no promises beyond showing up consistently and honestly? I looked at his extended hand, took it. One condition, I said. Anything. No more rescuing me without asking first. If I'm going to be with you, I'm going to be a partner, not something you protect. Something shifted in his eyes. Respect, maybe. Partners, then. Partners, I agreed. The next 2 years were nothing like I'd expected. Nikolai kept his word with methodical precision. He restructured his business completely, consulting me on ethics when questions arose. We had dinner twice a week, sometimes business, sometimes just conversation. He attended gallery openings and auction previews, listening to me explain techniques and artists with genuine interest. He was patient when I panicked, consistent when I doubted, honest about his failures and triumphs. He courted me the way he approached everything else. Strategically, yes, but with the goal of building something sustainable rather than achieving a quick victory. It was in year 2 that Beatrice reappeared at a family dinner, thinner, quieter. Her previous confidence dimmed. She'd made poor investments, trusted the wrong people, lost most of what she'd built. She looked at me across the table, at Nikolai beside me, and something complicated crossed her face. You're happy, she said simply. Not accusatory, just observational. I am, I replied, meaning it. After dinner, she pulled me aside. I'm sorry for taking him for granted, for not seeing what I had until it was gone. He was never yours to lose, I said gently. He was never mine to take. We found each other eventually. The overlooked sister and the reformed criminal. She smiled without bitterness. Quite the story. Quite the ordinary story, I corrected. 2 people learning to see each other. That's all. Nikolai proposed on a Tuesday, in my small apartment that I'd refused to give up despite his penthouse being available. No ring initially, just a question. Will you marry me? Not for my wealth or connections or protection, just for who I've become and who you've always been. I said yes with my whole heart. We married quietly 6 months later. I was 31, he was 38. The ceremony was small, family, close friends, no spectacle. By the time I was 33, Nikolai had exited his remaining questionable operations entirely. We opened a gallery together, legitimate, focused on Byzantine and medieval art, staffed by experts we respected. Beatrice eventually rebuilt, humbled but wiser. My parents finally saw me, truly saw me, when I stopped seeking their validation. And Nikolai, the man who'd once built empires on fear, learned to build a life on love. On Thursday evenings, we still met for coffee to discuss manuscripts. On Sundays, we walked through galleries, debating attribution and technique. He was spectacularly terrible at ordinary domesticity, burned dinner, forgot appointments, approached grocery shopping like military strategy. But he showed up, Every day, in small ways, he showed up. And that, I learned, was the greatest romance of all. Being chosen not once in a grand gesture, but repeatedly in quiet, consistent moments. Being seen not for what you could provide, but for who you were. Being loved not because someone conquered you, but because they learned to deserve you. I'd started as a bridge he tried to cross to reach my sister. I'd become the destination worth restructuring his entire world to deserve. And in the end, that transformation, his and mine both, was the greatest masterpiece either of us had ever authenticated. True, complete, priceless. I stood in the center of our gallery on a Tuesday afternoon, watching autumn light filter through the tall windows and illuminate the newly acquired 14th century triptych we'd just had authenticated. 3 years of marriage, 5 years since that terrible birthday. And still, some mornings I woke up slightly surprised to find Nikolai beside me, his arm draped protectively across my waist even in sleep. Helena? Maria, our gallery manager, appeared in the doorway. There's someone here to see you. She says it's personal. I turned, and my breath caught. Beatrice stood in the reception area, and the change in her was startling. Gone was the polished perfection I'd grown up envying. Her designer clothes had been replaced with modest, off-the-rack pieces. Her hair, once salon-perfect, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. But it was her eyes that showed the greatest transformation. They held a humility that had never been there before. Helena, she said softly, I know I don't have the right to just show up like this, but I needed to see you. I gestured toward my office, a small space lined with reference books and authentication equipment. Once we were seated, she twisted her hands in her lap, a gesture of nervousness I'd never seen from my confident younger sister. I'm getting married, she said finally, next month, to someone you've never met, a teacher. He makes a fraction of what Nikolai makes, lives in a small apartment, drives a 10-year-old car. She smiled, and it was genuine. He's kind, patient. He sees me, really sees me, not the performance I used to give. I'm happy for you, I said, meaning it. I wanted to ask if you'd come to the wedding, both of you. She looked up, meeting my eyes. I know that's asking a lot, after everything, but you're my sister, and I've spent 3 years learning what really matters. You matter, Helena. You always did, and I was too self-absorbed to see it. Before I could respond, the office door opened. Nikolai entered, carrying 2 coffee cups, stopping short when he saw Beatrice. His expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, wariness, then careful neutrality. Beatrice, he acknowledged with a slight nod. Nikolai. She stood, squaring her shoulders. I owe you an apology, too. I treated you like a prize to be won, not a person to know. I'm sorry for that. He studied her for a long moment, then set down the coffee cups and extended his hand. We were both playing games we shouldn't have been. I wish you happiness in your marriage. She shook his hand, relief evident in her expression. Thank you. That means more than you know. After she left, Nikolai settled into the chair she'd vacated, handing me one of the coffee cups. Are we going to the wedding? Do you want to? I asked, curious about his reaction. He considered this, his gray eyes thoughtful. 3 years ago, I would have said no. Too uncomfortable. Too much history. But I've learned that holding on to the past serves no purpose. He reached across the desk, taking my hand. If you want to go, we'll go. If you want to decline gracefully, we'll do that. This is your family, your choice. That evening, as we prepared dinner in the kitchen of the apartment I'd refused to give up, we split our time between my modest space and his penthouse. I brought it up again. I think I want to go, I said, chopping vegetables while Nikolai attempted to follow a recipe with the intense focus he usually reserved for business negotiations. Not because I've forgotten everything that happened, but because I want Beatrice to see that forgiveness is possible. That growth is real. He looked up from the sauce he was stirring. Badly, I noted, but I'd learned to let him figure these things out himself. You're a better person than I am. No, I corrected, moving to stand beside him and gently taking the wooden spoon to prevent disaster. I've just had more practice at being overlooked. It taught me that holding grudges hurts me more than anyone else. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder as we stood there together. Have I told you today that you're the best thing that ever happened to me? Twice, I replied, smiling. Once this morning, once at lunch. You're consistent, I'll give you that. Consistently in love with you, he murmured against my neck. Consistently grateful you gave me a second chance. Consistently amazed that you chose me. I turned in his arms, looking up at this man who had dismantled his entire empire to deserve me. I chose us. There's a difference. The wedding was beautiful in its simplicity. Beatrice married her teacher, David, in a small church ceremony with perhaps 50 guests. I watched her exchange vows with a man who looked at her the way Nikolai looked at me, with genuine love rather than strategic interest, and felt something in my chest release. A final thread of old hurt that I hadn't realized I was still holding. At the reception, held in a modest community hall, Beatrice approached Nikolai and me during dinner. Thank you for coming, she said, her new husband standing supportively beside her. It means everything that you're here. You look happy, I told her honestly. Genuinely happy. I am. She glanced at David, then back to us. I spent so many years chasing what I thought I wanted. Status, wealth, being the center of attention. I lost almost everything before I understood that none of it mattered without real connection. She paused. You tried to tell me that once, Helena. Remember? When we were teenagers, and you said that collecting admirers wasn't the same as finding someone who admired you. I did remember, vaguely. One of those moments where I'd offered wisdom that was promptly ignored. I should have listened then, Beatrice continued. But I'm listening now. Watching you two, seeing how you built something real from such a complicated beginning that showed me what was possible. After she moved on to greet other guests, Nikolai leaned close. Did you really tell her that? About admirers versus finding someone who admired you? Apparently, I'd forgotten. You've always been wise, he said, his fingers intertwining with mine under the table, even when no one was paying attention. Someone was paying attention, I replied, looking at him. Eventually. Later that night, back in my apartment, we lay in bed talking, one of our favorite rituals. Nikolai had learned that I processed the world through conversation, that silence wasn't always comfortable for me the way it was for him. I've been thinking about something, he said, running his fingers through my hair. About children. My heart skipped. We'd discussed this before, but carefully, both aware of the complexity. And I want them, with you, but only if you want them too. He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at me in the dim light. I know my past makes that complicated. The world I came from, the enemies I made before I left that life. I would never want to put our children at risk. You've been completely legitimate for 3 years, I reminded him. The gallery is successful, your investments are ethical, you've cut ties with anyone connected to your old operations. True, but reputation lingers. People don't forget who I used to be. I considered this, understanding his concern. People also don't forget who they become. You've spent 3 years proving you're different. At some point, the present has to outweigh the past. Is that what you've done? Let the present outweigh the past? Every day, I said honestly. Every day I choose to believe in who you are now rather than who you were. Every day I choose to trust that the man who shows up for coffee, dates and burns dinner and listens to me talk about manuscript authentication for hours, that's the real you. He kissed me, soft and lingering. I don't deserve you. Stop saying that. You've earned me. Through patience, consistency, and choosing to become someone worthy of being chosen. That's not luck or fortune. That's work. Then let me keep working, he whispered. Let me prove every day that choosing me was the right decision. 6 months later, I discovered I was pregnant. The news came via a routine doctor's appointment that I'd almost skipped due to a busy authentication schedule. Sitting in my car in the medical building parking lot, staring at the positive test results, I felt a complex swirl of emotions. Joy, certainly, but also fear and protectiveness, and a fierce determination that this child would grow up knowing they were wanted, planned for, cherished. I told Nikolai that evening, in our gallery after closing. He was reviewing acquisition proposals in his office when I entered, closing the door behind me. I have news, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He looked up immediately, reading something in my expression. What kind of news? I placed the medical report on his desk, watched him process the information, saw the moment understanding hit. His face transformed, shock giving way to wonder, giving way to something so tender it made my eyes sting with tears. We're having a baby, he said, voice rough with emotion. We are. He stood, crossed to me, and knelt. Actually knelt, pressing his forehead against my stomach where our child was growing. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for trusting me with this, for trusting me with you. I swear I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of this gift. I ran my fingers through his hair, this powerful man humbled by impending fatherhood. You already are. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Nikolai attended every appointment, asked detailed questions, read medical textbooks late into the night. He baby-proofed both apartments, set up nurseries in each location, interviewed pediatricians with the same intensity he'd once brought to business negotiations. You know the baby won't arrive for several months, right? I teased, watching him rearrange the nursery furniture for the third time. I want everything perfect, he said, adjusting the crib position slightly. I want our child to have everything I didn't. I moved to stand beside him, taking his hand. Tell me about your childhood. He rarely spoke of it. I'd learned not to push, to let him share when ready. Now, he sighed, pulling me to sit with him in the rocking chair he'd insisted on buying. My father was... He paused, searching for words. Powerful. Feared. Successful by all external measures. But he saw people as assets or liabilities, including me. I was valuable because I could be trained, molded into the heir he needed. But I was never valued for myself. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I became him, Nikolai continued, or tried to. Built the same kind of empire, made the same calculations, saw people the same way. He looked at me. Until you. You were supposed to be an asset, a bridge to your sister, to social connections. But you treated me like a person. Asked my opinions on art, not because you wanted something, but because you were genuinely interested. Argued with me about provenance details because accuracy mattered to you more than pleasing me. I remember, I said, smiling slightly. You said I was refreshingly stubborn. You were real, he corrected. The only real thing in my carefully constructed world. And when you walked away, when you valued yourself enough to refuse to be used, I realized I'd become everything I'd hated about my father. Someone who saw people as utilities, rather than humans worthy of respect. And now? I prompted gently. Now I want to be the father I never had. Someone who sees our child as a person from day one, not a legacy or asset or heir. Someone who values them for who they are, not what they can provide. He placed his hand over my growing belly. I want to break that cycle, with you helping me. We'll do it together, I promised. Our daughter was born on a snowy January morning, arriving exactly 2 weeks early, and absolutely furious about the transition from womb to world. Nikolai held her for the first time with hands that trembled, this man who'd faced down rivals and threats without flinching, undone completely by 7 pounds of squalling infant. She's perfect, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. Helena, she's absolutely perfect. We named her Sophia, Wisdom, because wisdom had saved us both. Wisdom to walk away when I wasn't valued. Wisdom to recognize what he'd lost and work to deserve it back. Wisdom to build something real from broken beginnings. The first year of Sophia's life taught us both more than we'd expected. Nikolai, who'd approached fatherhood with his characteristic intensity, had to learn that control wasn't always possible, that babies operated on their own schedules, developed at their own pace, required patience and flexibility. I watched him learn to soothe her at 3 a.m., walking endless circles around the apartment, singing Russian lullabies his grandmother had taught him. Watched him read parenting books with the same focus he once brought to business strategy. Watched him panic over every fever, every cry, every developmental milestone that didn't happen exactly when the book said it should. She's fine, I told him one evening, finding him hovering over her crib watching her sleep. Babies are more resilient than you think. I know, he said, not taking his eyes off Sophia. Logically, I know. But she's so small, so vulnerable. What if I fail her? I slipped my arm around his waist, leaning against his side. You won't. Not because you'll be perfect, you won't be, but because you care enough to try. That's what matters. When Sophia was 18 months old, we received unexpected news. My father called on a Tuesday afternoon, his voice heavy. Helena, it's your mother. She's in the hospital. Heart attack. They're saying... His voice broke. They're saying she might not make it through the night. We rushed to the hospital, Sophia with us, because there was no time to arrange childcare. My mother lay in the ICU, tubes and monitors creating a barrier between us. But she was conscious, and when she saw me, something in her expression crumbled. Helena, she whispered. I was wrong. About so much. I took her hand, my throat tight. Don't. You need to rest. No. I need to say this while I can. She looked at Nikolai, holding Sophia, then back to me. I spent your whole life seeing Beatrice, invested everything in her success, her happiness. And I never saw you. Never valued what you offered because it wasn't flashy or obvious. Mom, let me finish, she insisted, squeezing my hand weakly. You were the foundation, the steady one, the reliable one, the one who kept everything running. And I took that for granted. Assumed you'd always be there, never questioning why you stayed when we gave you so little recognition. Tears blurred my vision. I stayed because you're my family. Family should honor each other, she said. Should see each other. And I failed at that. But watching you now, with your husband and your daughter, seeing the life you built, you did that without our support, without our acknowledgement. You did it through your own strength. She looked at Nikolai again. Take care of her. She's stronger than she knows, but everyone needs someone who sees their strength. I will, Nikolai promised, his voice rough. Every day of my life. My mother survived that night, and the next, and slowly recovered over the following months. The experience changed something fundamental in our family dynamic. My parents began really seeing me, asking about my work, my interests, my perspectives, including me in decisions, not because they needed something, but because my input mattered. Beatrice, now a mother herself to a 2-year-old son, became not just my sister, but my friend. We met for coffee regularly, sharing the complexities of parenthood, laughing about our mother's well-intentioned but sometimes overwhelming advice. I can't believe it took near-death experiences and complete humility for our family to figure out basic respect, she said one afternoon, watching Sophia and her son play together. We're not very efficient, are we? We got there eventually, I replied. That's what matters. On our 5th wedding anniversary, Nikolai surprised me with a trip. Just the 2 of us, with my parents watching Sophia for the weekend. We flew to a villa in Tuscany, overlooking vineyards that stretched to the horizon. Remember when I asked you to dinner that first time? He said, as we sat on the terrace watching sunset paint the sky. I told you I was asking, not maneuvering. I remember. I've spent 5 years asking what you need, what you want, how I can be better. And I want you to know, I'm never going to stop asking. Because the moment I think I know everything about you, the moment I stop being curious about your thoughts and dreams and perspectives, that's when I become the man I used to be. I turned to him, this man who'd transformed himself through patient, consistent effort. You want to know what I need? Always. This, I said simply. You, me, ordinary moments that we choose to make extraordinary. Sunday morning coffees and arguments about manuscript attribution, and watching you fail spectacularly at cooking but refusing to give up. I need the man who shows up every day, not the grand gestures. You have him, Nikolai promised. For the rest of our lives, you have him. As we sat there, hands intertwined, watching Italian twilight deepen into night, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From overlooked daughter to woman who knew her worth. From strategic user to man who dismantled his empire to deserve love. From broken beginning to this, peace, partnership, family. Thank you, I said softly. For what? For being patient enough to let me heal. For being consistent enough that I could trust you. For loving me enough to become someone worthy of being loved back. He pulled me close, and we sat in comfortable silence. The kind that only comes when 2 people have learned each other's languages, each other's rhythms, each other's truths. We had been broken separately, then broken together, then rebuilt into something stronger than either of us had been alone. And that, I'd learned, was the real miracle of love. Not that it completed you, but that it gave you the courage to complete yourself while standing beside someone who was doing the same work. I had started as a bridge meant to be crossed and forgotten. I'd become a destination worth every sacrifice. And Nikolai had transformed from a man who saw people as utilities into someone who understood that the greatest treasures weren't acquired through strategy. They were earned through patient, devoted becoming. Our love story wasn't written in grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was written in Tuesday afternoons and burnt dinners and midnight conversations, and the choice, made daily, to see each other clearly and choose each other completely. That was more than enough. That was everything.